After recently receiving a bit of a victory at the hands of the United States Supreme Court, Donald Trump has just been humiliated in back-to-back court cases on two very important but very different issues by none other than two Trump-appointed judges. What a stunning betrayal. To unpack this legal discussion, I brought in practicing attorney, my Live and Learn co-host, Pisco. Pisco, what the hell is going on with these two cases, Trump's defeat at the hands of two Trump-appointed judges?
Yeah, thanks so much, Isaiah. Let's start first with the Alien Enemies Act deportation. So, as you guys probably know, the Supreme Court earlier this week said that the exclusive remedy to prevent yourself from being deported under the Alien Enemies Act is through a habeas petition, and gave Trump actually a victory with respect to some TROs that had existed under Judge Boasberg out of DC, and sort of dismissed the case in that posture under the Administrative Procedures Act. The long story short, as soon as that ruling came down, there were new habeas petitions filed the way the Supreme Court said that came out of Texas and New York. The one that we're focusing on right now is in Texas, where a federal judge appointed by Trump said that these deportations had to stop, not just for the petitioners involved, but for anyone designated under the Alien Enemies Act in the Southern District of Texas.
Yeah, so let's take a look at this. Again, two specific cases regarding the deportations and the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision. But I do want to focus, again, for irony's sake and for schadenfreude, on the Trump appointee, obviously. So U.S. District Judge Fernando Rodriguez Jr. issued a temporary restraining order barring the Trump administration from removing three men in Texas and, quote, any other person that respondents claim are subject to removal under the proclamation from El Valle Detention Center there. Quote, in the present matter, the court finds that the removal of JAV, JGG, WGH, or any other individual subject to the proclamation by the United States would cause immediate and irreparable injury to the removed individuals, as they would be unable to seek habeas relief. Judge Rodriguez wrote, noting the, quote, substantial likelihood exists that the individual could not be returned to the United States if they are deported. Judge Rodriguez, a Trump appointee, set a hearing for Friday to consider extending his order, which expires April 23rd. So this is, as you say, like a very quick response to the recent Supreme Court ruling. Does this surprise you that a Trump appointee in Texas, because of course I'm thinking of Matthew Kacsmaryk, the most infamous Trump appointee of all, who would slap down, nationwide injunctions on pretty much anything President Biden attempted to do during his 4 years in office. But are you surprised by his ruling, both in terms of the logic of it and then also given who appointed him? Does the ruling make sense? And are you surprised that it came from this specific judge?
The only surprise I have, the happy surprise, is that it extends beyond just the deportees themselves or the people who are proposed to be deportees. That is a happy surprise for me. But the ruling, of course, makes total sense. By the same opinion that handed Trump a win, there was a unanimous 9-0 decision that they had to be, that is to say, the people designated as alien enemies, afforded a right to file this habeas petition. That means a real right, not just an on-paper right. The Trump administration was saying, they could file, but not if we can put them on a plane and load them up to this gulag before we can get them to file their petition. So that part is completely makes sense. The logic of it and the irreparable potential injury that could occur. That last line, they said that there could be irreparable injury in the fact that these individuals might not be able to come back. Right after that sentence, he cited the Abrego Garcia case, which is currently going to the Supreme Court as well. And so these courts are very conscious of the fact that Trump is playing a game here. And that game is a dangerous game where he sends people off to El Salvador and asks questions later. And I'm happy that the court in Texas also won an SDNY, or they're not standing up for it, and that they're going to actually, do something about it before these people are irreparably harmed.
Well, I'm curious, like when you're describing it. So again, as a layman here, you could almost see it like, because I have no doubt that Judge Rodriguez is going to catch a lot of flack, a lot of shit from MAGA supporters. Oh my God, you're a Trump appointee and you dare rule against Trump in this way, just like Justice Amy Coney Barrett has received from time to time with her dissents or her joining the liberal justices. She's caught a lot of flack as well. But as you describe it, it's almost like for all we know, Judge Rodriguez might have an ideological predisposition towards Trump, but he would be defying the Supreme Court effectively by letting the federal government deport these people without giving them sufficient time to challenge their deportation, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely true, and that's one of the reasons why some people are speculating that this Supreme Court ruling has a little bit of a Marbury versus Madison feel. If you remember, that was a case that the Jefferson administration back in the day ostensibly won, but it was the court claiming the power of judicial review in the process of letting the administration win. Now, I am a little bit more skeptical of that conclusion. I think that it's a little bit more of a cynical opinion, but the result is good that the 9 justices on the Supreme Court said that these people do have due process rights. Even alleged terrorists, even alleged gang members, even illegal immigrants or alleged illegal immigrants, really, because we don't have a full account of everyone here, are afforded due process rights, which is a good thing. By fact and by reporting, it appears that many of these individuals actually are not members of Trinidad Agua and actually are, uphold the, good values and upstanding citizens. And so this is a really good decision.
And we'll close on this particular thing because obviously, again, I mentioned in my opening for those watching that there were 2 Trump appointees in 2 different cases that dealt him defeats. This is just one. We're about to turn to the other, totally separate issue. But to close the loop on this, is this kind of the silver lining here that based on that unanimity by the Supreme Court that's basically confers or reaffirms the right of due process to all of the accused undocumented migrants who are deportable under the Alien Enemies Act. Does it make it less likely that we will see the sorts of abuses that we've seen by the Trump administration in previous months? Are they less likely by definition now?
I think that they are less likely by definition now, if for any reason, just because of the geographic holding of these cases. A lot of people are probably are held in the Southern District of Texas who are proposed to be deported. And I think it will reinforce the notion in the other district courts where habeas petitions will start to be filed that they should follow suit. And I think the Trump administration, though they have been bold in defying the court's orders before, are less likely to do something if there is an order. Not that they won't do it, just that I think that they're less likely and they'll try to appeal. And so that buys critically time for the petitioners to settle their affairs, hire lawyers, and that's all good news.
That is good news. It's sad that we have to cling to this almost like it's a life raft, right? Because this is, in any other timeline in the multiverse, just a recognition that due process exists would be the bare fucking minimum. And yet this is where we are. So having acknowledged that, let's turn to the other major case. Again, back-to-back legal defeats for Donald Trump. And this one on free speech grounds. So this is something that I've been discussing quite a bit on my channel, but there hadn't been any major updates, which is that Donald Trump has been declaring war, it seems, on the free press and waging a First Amendment censorious war because the Associated Press wouldn't use state-sanctioned language regarding the description of the Gulf of Mexico. He renamed it the Gulf of America. I will recognize as the Gulf of Mexico. And we're seeing actual pushback from a Trump appointee. So Pisco, unpack this one for us.
Yeah. So this is a really interesting issue and a really interesting opinion by a Trump-appointed judge, Judge McFadden, out of DC, and it is dealing with a thorny First Amendment issue. Usually, the First Amendment applies at its maximum in public spaces that are designated as, or that are traditional public fora. These are places like parks, streets, roads, and things like that, where the government really isn't supposed to interfere with your First Amendment rights in those particular places. And the court is struggling, and I think very thoughtfully, about how to deal with First Amendment issues in places that are not these traditional public fora, that in fact are non-public fora. Here we're thinking about the Oval Office even. And the court, if you read the opinion, basically says the government can have a lot of good reasons. It doesn't even have to have a reason that you or I agree with to deny people access to some of these non-public spaces, including the White House, including the East Room. But when they open up some of these non-public fora to reporters, and here we're talking about either the White House press pool, which is a small group of individuals that kind of follows the president wherever they go. It's a highly selective process, or the press corps, which is like a larger group of individuals. All the members of the press pool are also members of the press corps. So here we're talking about
vice versa.
Exactly. Yeah. Here we're talking about members of the press pool. And what the AP is saying is, okay, we agree the government could deny us a reason based on security or even some kind of neutral rationale.
Space.
Exactly.
That's another one, right? There's a limited amount of space on Air Force One or in the Oval Office, indeed. But what is the exception here?
But
What
you can't,
takes
yeah,
us a bridge too far?
you can't do it based on viewpoint discrimination. It's highly deferential to the government. Yeah, you can deny them for a lot of neutral reasons, but it can't be for viewpoint discrimination. And the court made that clear and cited a bunch of precedent that distinguished like one-on-one interviews, which could be done based on viewpoint discrimination. This is a case that the court wants to construe, and I think is properly construed as about access to space. And once you invite a select group of speakers to access space, you have to open it up on a viewpoint neutral basis, even in non-public forum, and distinguishing that from sort of one-on-one sit-down interviews or situations in which it's traditional public forum, and so you have the most amount of First Amendment rights. A very interesting opinion, and a defeat for the Trump administration. The court goes out of its way to say that like the government's viewpoint discrimination is blatant. They use that word blatant.
Wow. So, yeah, I want to read the specific quoted excerpt from the decision, courtesy of the Washington Post. Quote, "The court simply holds that under the First Amendment, if the government opens its doors to some journalists, be it to the Oval Office, the East Room, or elsewhere, it cannot then shut those doors to other journalists because of their viewpoints. The Constitution requires no less." Again, I got to say, as somebody, again, I've especially when this story broke, or the initial conflict between Trump and the Associated Press broke, because also Fire got involved. This is a right-coded, libertarian-coded free speech group, but they have been, quite frankly, pretty damn consistent, almost like with an unimpeachable record, both against Democratic administrations, because, of course, they had complaints against President Biden and the Biden administration and the Obama administration before it. But they don't pull their punches with Donald Trump. And I guess I do want to kind of wrap this up to the broader Trump war against free speech, because as far as I'm concerned, it's unprecedented. Now, I know President Obama had his issues with journalists as well. A credible case is made against the Obama administration in its treatment of journalists, but we are seeing a multi-pronged attack on free speech and free press from the Trump administration. You have what he did here with the Associated Press. You have Brendan Carr, the MAGA troglodyte who's in charge of the FCC, a man who has resurrected complaints against news networks and news agencies that Trump has criticized, but has also protected news networks which are friendlier to Trump, like Fox News, for example, whereas the Biden administration's FCC dismissed cases against all of them. They dismissed cases against Fox. They dismissed cases against ABC, NBC, and CBS. But Carr is targeting Trump's enemies with surgical precision, the likes of which we've never seen. Do you think that this is, I guess, the start of a shift in the tide, or should we not read too much into this particular decision?
I wouldn't read too much into the decision, because the decision acknowledges that the president still has a lot of leverage and a lot of different things he can do to, mess with the First Amendment type principles, even if it's not like messing with the First Amendment in the sense of the law. So I'll just give you one example. They're allowed to, if they want to, open up the press pool to new media. And if they wanted to, they could get rid of the press pool altogether. And they can, if they want to, as they did, take over who gets assigned to the press pool from the private organization that used to run it.
Yeah, the White House Correspondents Association no longer dictates. Yeah.
So those are all decisions that it can take. And so I think here, and I think that it should be able to take under the law. Just because it's not against the law doesn't mean we can't criticize it. That's why I think this opinion is so thoughtful and precise. And I really, praise Judge McFadden on it. Even Trump appointed judges, I think, can be principled. I think another example of that is Justice Amy Coney Barrett, who I think has been issuing more reasoned opinions and more willing to side with the liberals when they're obviously right on the law. And so I wouldn't read too much into this, but there are courts that are willing to stand up to Trump, and right now they're one of our only defensive lines against them.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Again, I'll quote an excerpt here from the Washington Post. The judge, a Trump appointee to the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia in 2017, determined that the Associated Press met the legal threshold for granting an injunction, which required the news organization to prove that it was likely to win the case. Quote, the court concludes that the AP is likely to succeed on the merits of its First Amendment viewpoint discrimination and retaliation claims for both its press pool and East Room allegations, he wrote. The other thing I want to note here, because again, I also consider this an attack on free speech as well, but even the broader conversation about Trump's war against law firms who have previously represented, individuals in cases that he has found unsavory. We're less than 3 months into this piece. Do you Do you expect that Trump will start to relent in his attacks on news networks and law firms? Or do you think the capitulation from so many law firms and even CBS, quite frankly, and I think is rumored to be seeking a settlement with Donald Trump? We know ABC did, to the tune of $15 million when he sued ABC and George Stephanopoulos. Do you expect that Trump is going to keep the momentum up, or he just wanted to get some initial blows in and he's made his case and now he's going to back off?
No, I think that this is serial and escalating. It started with Mahmoud Khalil, and like you said, a lot of these attacks on law firms, on organizations, and there's nothing from his actions that show that he is relenting. The only thing that can stop him are the courts and the people by voicing their concerns and by supporting people who are not anti-free speech. In this case, people who are not servile to Donald Trump and are going to make excuses for him no matter what. And so I would not expect him to slow down. It's on to us to fight back against him and to make sure that in the next election cycle, the good guys are on top.
Well, and I'll conclude by saying this, and obviously this leads more into politics. You and I co-host Live and Learn together, and you also know that we both, to some extent, I would argue in many ways, me more so, advocate for a more ruthless Democratic Party. I would just encourage conservatives and Republicans watching to be careful about the precedent you set, because eventually you will elect a ruthless Democrat, somebody who's not Dick Durbin or Joe Biden or super friendly, who will do some of this, wield some of these tactics against Fox News or Newsmax or conservative law firms as well. So be careful about the precedent you set, because eventually you will find a Democrat who's willing to play politics the way that Republicans do. And that's going to be bad news for you. So with that in mind, Pisco, where can people find you?
Pisco's Hour on YouTube. And thank you so much, Isaiah.
I appreciate it, man.